Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of the series Intercultural Learning in World Language Education, a collective effort of faculty from Purdue University and The Ohio State University. Today's topic is assessment of/as intercultural learning in world languages. My name is Tatiana Babic-Williams. I'm a senior lecturer of Italian, and I'm here today with my colleague, Alitha.
And I'm Alitha Stahl, and I'm Senior Intercultural Learning Specialist at Purdue University.
Great. Can we have the next slide? So here is our plan for today. We will address the question of the purpose of assessment and its role in the backward design. And we will consider some more nuanced definitions of assessment. And then we will mostly talk about assessment examples and tools that are specifically geared toward intercultural learning in a language classroom. So let's start with the bigger picture question. Alitha?
So I invite you to share in the chat why assess, or what is even the purpose of assessment? I invite you to share some of what people are sharing there.
Okay, so to see where students are, to measure learning, measure alignment, verify that the students grasp the material, situate students on the learning curve, monitor students' progress, measure learning, make sure students know how to work, what to work on, areas for improvement, receive feedback when to do intervention, help students and ourselves to improve, view application of learning objectives.
So it's clear that you all, many of you work with assessment and are comfortable thinking about it. Many times, the terms assessment and evaluation are used interchangeably, and your definitions and sense of purpose of assessment don't necessarily go on the side of evaluation, but that may cause some confusion at times. And there are good reasons these terms are used interchangeably because they both measure learning. Both can be done with the goal of improving the whole learning process. To nuance a bit, I like to think of assessment as monitoring learning. The goal is to improve the teaching and learning process in some, but you can also do it in situ, right in the moment. It's not just future aimed. It can focus on the individual. For example, if a student realizes through the assessment process that they could shift their study habits, or an instructor adjusts content in response to what they've learned by monitoring students. But it can also address the group. Evaluation focuses more on assigning values or judging the merit. And the goal is often to compare students among themselves or to others, or even an instructor in some way, or compare to a standard. Can again focus on the individual. This is often what we think of as grading. So sometimes assessment and grading come together, and sometimes they're very, very different processes. It can also be about rating an instructor. We start with assessment in the big picture because assessment can tell us a lot about the whole teaching and learning process. Assessment can tell us something about the students, something about the instructors. It can also focus on the content. That is, it can set the goals for learning. It can be part of the learning, and then it's part of the learning process. And the examples that I have here are just references for intercultural assessments that you might look at later.
Yes, and we believe that it is essential to view assessment not in isolation from the learning process, so not as an add-on, but as a part of a backward design. And you're probably familiar with Wiggins and McTeague's and D. Fink's idea of backward design as a three-step process of intentional design of learning, which actually starts with the end goal of the learning process. So as you can see on the graph, in step one, we identify the desired results. In other words, we ask, what will our students be able to do better after taking this course or doing this intercultural activity? In step two, we determine acceptable evidence. We ask, how will we assess if the learning is happening? How will we know if students are learning? And how will students know if they are learning? And only in step three do we plan and align learning experiences by asking what specific activities will help students achieve those desired goals. So why do we call it backward? Because we start with the end results, with the long-term goals and learner-centered outcomes, and we work our way back in the learning design process. And it's backward also because it is going in the opposite direction of the traditional textbook-driven or activity-based teaching. Another very important point is the intentional alignment between these three components. Because as we all know, just because something was taught, it does not mean that it has been learned. So a systematic and the intentional integration of assessment can give both the instructors and the learners a way to check if learning is happening, what kind of learning is happening, and whether this process of learning and its outcomes can or should be modified or enhanced. Next slide, please. Which will be an example of the backward design for the integration of intercultural learning at all levels of Italian language at Purdue. As you can see, in step one, we started with identifying the desired results, and we focused on the specific intercultural skills, attitudes, and knowledges in each level of language. Then in step two, we determined forms of assessment, some formative and some summative, to see if and how learning is happening. And we'll be discussing pretty much all of this today during the webinar. And then in step three, we designed specific activities that will help students attain those desired intercultural outcomes. So now that we have examined the role of assessment in backward design, let's discuss some definitions of assessment. Aletha?
So we'd like you again to share in the chat how you understand assessment of learning and assessment as learning. How do you conceive of these two different ways of assessing? Are we getting anything in there?
Not yet, not yet. Okay, assessment as learning is task-based. Assessment of learning is more summative assessment. Yep. Assessment, okay, I'm a little bit behind. Assessment as learning is practice, trying things out, formative. Formative assessment might be an example of assessment as learning. Of learning is focused on language knowledge, as learning is focused on using the language. Assessment as learning is formative.
Great, thank you all.
Yeah.
And I think you've hit on some of the key distinctions there.
And another thing that I might add, as learning is a reflective process. We have a couple of those.
Oh yeah, that's great. So here are just some quick definitions. And I would say that these are culled from multiple teaching and learning sites from different universities. I haven't seen one very precise definition to cite, but I think you've gotten the general idea. When you assessment of learning is often after the fact. What did the students already learn? And it's what we often equate with evaluation. So it could be like if you did a pre and a post, a T1, T2 assessment for intercultural, or you rate students' writing with a rubric. That might be ways of determining what they've learned. Assessment for learning is more formative. That means that it happens during the process, can be interactive and contributes to the learning. For the instructor, for example, by collecting feedback from a student, I may have a better sense of how to then realign my activities with learner needs, or I may know what students feel they've gotten or don't have. Assessment as learning might be considered a part of assessment for learning. That is, it's formative, but it's very much focused on the learning process and is very student-centered. It's metacognitive. So the students reflect on and set goals for and then monitor their own learning in some way. An example of this might be if a student would keep a reflective journal and then in response to feedback, elaborate next steps on their own learning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will continue now by discussing some examples and tools of assessment that are specifically geared toward intercultural learning in a language class. And you can see a list of these here. I will start with discussing the AAC&U rubric in relation especially to reflection assignment. So if you're not familiar with the AAC&U rubrics, the AAC&U stands for the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and the value in the value rubric stands for Valid Assessment of Learning in Undergraduate Education. The AAC&U rubrics are used by many colleges and universities, including Purdue, to articulate the foundational and embedded learning outcomes of undergraduate education as a whole. This particular rubric, so the one on intercultural knowledge and competence, is informed by Janet and Milton Bennett's and Darla Deerdorf's intercultural scholarship. And as you can see, it sort of breaks down the intercultural competence in some of its basic components, which some of them are cognitive, so knowledge, cultural self-awareness, and worldview frameworks. Some of them are behavioral. So empathy and verbal and nonverbal communication, and some of them are affective, as the attitudes of curiosity and openness. The rubric, actually, the whole rubric provides performance descriptors demonstrating progressively more sophisticated level of attainment. But what you see here is just an illustration of the proficient stage, so stage 4, the capstone. The rubric is just kind of hard to represent, so we thought we would just give you this example. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So the question is now, how can the AAC&U rubric be used? In Italian at Purdue, we use it both as a framework and as assessment. We use the rubric as a framework for our backward design in order to determine the desired outcomes, as I already had shown on a previous slide. So to develop specific intercultural knowledges, skills, and attitudes. Next slide, please. But we also use the AAC&U rubric as assessment in 3 different ways. And this is the first way. So the rubric is used to assess students' intercultural learning performance and growth as demonstrated in the reflection assignment. So this would actually be assessment of learning, right? It's summative, it's after the fact. We're asking, what did students learn? The reflection assignment assesses learners' understanding. And so when we craft the reflection questions, we tend to focus less on the ability to explain and interpret and more on the ability to actually apply the knowledge, skill, or attitude. So these questions stimulate perspective taking, perspective shifting, empathy, also self-knowledge, and self-assessment. One important note that I make here is that, as you can see, the rubric has stages. So this is a Purdue adaptation of the rubric. It has 3 stages: developing, emerging, and proficient. But I emphasize, the reflections are not evaluated based on the developmental stage. This means that if I, as an instructor, think that one student is at a developing stage, it doesn't mean that they're going to get a D, as opposed to somebody who is proficient and will automatically get an A. So we make that very clear to the students when we describe how we are grading. And we are actually grading completion, complexity, and effort that students put into the reflecting. So the rubric in this case is used as a guideline that directs the stage appropriate kind of instructor feedback. So as I'm grading these, assessing these reflections, I keep the rubric in mind, and I'm asking myself, what questions or what suggestions can I propose to this learner to provide them with the motivation and direction for growth that is appropriate to this person's stage. I would also add that an excellent assessment method is a two-turn discussion between the learner and teacher, in which in the first turn, instructor provides feedback to students' reflection, and the student responds to the feedback with modifications or further insights. And then in the second turn, instructor again provides feedback on the modified reflection, and the student responds to the feedback. So in this case, what's going on is the assessment as learning. So it's formative, it's taking place during the learning process, it allows for improved learning outcomes, and it fosters metacognitive awareness that we were talking about. Okay, next slide, please. So the second way in which we use the AAC&U rubric is for students' self-assessment of their intercultural learning and growth. So this would be assessment as learning again. It's formative, it is student-centered, it's metacognitive, and students are asked to reflect on, set goals, and monitor their own learning with instructors' help to elaborate next steps. You can see an example here when this is just one question from the reflection assignment. We are asking students, give them the AAC&U rubric and ask them to self-assess, to rank the competence in one of the chosen skills along the continuum. And very importantly, we ask them, if you feel like you are proficient, can you support that with a description of an experience that illustrates it? If, on the other hand, you feel like you need to make progress, suggest a way in which you can practice it and then challenge yourself to progress to the next stage. Basically, we are asking the students, how will you get there and how will you know that you're there? Next slide, please. So this is the third way that we use the AAC&U rubric as assessment. It is described in this example. We use it explicitly as a learning tool, that is, as a content of one of our intercultural activity. This intercultural lab, we call the activities the labs. The intercultural detectives is done in the second semester of Italian. And first we break students in small group, and we give them the rubric that describes different stages of the development of openness. And then we provide them with de-identified samples of student reflection assignments. And we are asking them to code them and to assess them against the rubric that was provided and analyzed. And we're, of course, we say, like good detectives, we will try to match the samples to a particular stage of the rubric, but also and always provide arguments and evidence for these choices. This is definitely assessment as learning. And actually, if you're doing this in person, in 15 minutes, you can observe learning taking place. As students practice this process with multiple samples, you can actually see the growth in their confidence, proficiency, and collaboration. Next slide, please. So now we're moving on from looking at the AAC&U rubric and how it can be used for assessment. We're moving to debrief as an assessment method. So debrief is an instructor moderated method of assessment, and it helps students to start critically reflecting on the intercultural activity experience, to relate it to the real world, to discover useful insights and share them with the group. Because many of the activities are experiential in nature and they include a more holistic experience. So not only knowledge is being imparted, but we're dealing with attitudes and with behaviors and we're simulating those. Debrief is crucially important so that the students can move beyond that first impression affective responses and to think through the actual experience, to start to reflect. The question is, how can we help students critically reflect on the experience, right? How can we make them achieve that aha moment, that sort of shift in awareness? Next slide, please. Okay, here you can see the examples of two very effective methods for debrief. One is the Thiagi debrief questions, and the other one is Terry Borton's critical reflection questions. And so the Thiagi debrief, let's just go briefly through these questions. You would ask students after an intercultural intervention, something along the lines of, how do you feel? This is about getting in touch with feelings and with sharing them, getting any strong emotions off the chest. And this allows students to be more objective going into the reflection part. What happened? Ask students to compare and contrast their recollections of what happened and to draw some general conclusions. What did you learn? Ask students to generate and test different hypotheses. And then how does this relate to the real world? Of course, asks the students to reflect on what is the relevance of what we just did in class to real life experiences. What if is about applying these insights to new contexts and using alternative scenarios to speculate on how people's behaviors would change under different circumstances. And then last, what next is about undertaking action planning. So figuring out strategies for changing one's behavior in the future that is based on the insights. Similarly, Terry Borton's reflection questions, which are widely used, so what, and now what? What asks about basically what happened, so what did you learn from it, and now what? How will you apply what you learned in the future? And it's really important here when we do these questions to stimulate students to find connections between these three areas and to realize how the events and experiences can lead to personal, or in this case, also intercultural growth. Next slide, please. And this is finally an example of debrief questions. And you can see how Thiagi questions have been applied to this particular intercultural experience. So basically we have what happened, how did it feel? Question number 3, how might personal or cultural values influence the interpretation? It's about what if. We have the question, what did you learn? And lastly, what next? How can you use that in your everyday life? One special and last note that I want to make is about the debrief variation that we have been doing in virtual environment. It is a sort of a 2-turn debrief that allows for a more in-depth debriefing experience. That's at least been my experience with it. So in the first phase, since we're not all together in a room, in the first phase, students, usually in pairs or small groups, after performing an intercultural activity, they answer the debrief questions and post them on the discussion board. And then in phase 2, the instructor compiles all those debrief answers and then does a debrief, a whole group debrief live, either synchronously or in person. And this allows for the discussion, it allows for the instructor and peer feedback. And then lastly, we collaboratively create some main takeaways from that experience. This is definitely also assessment as learning. It is formative, happens during the learning process, includes direct instructor and peer feedback, and brainstorming actually of the ways to improve. And this gives the students a chance to apply it then, what they've learned, to their individual reflection assignments. And actually many students do pick up on that in their reflection assignments, and they say what they've learned from other students during debrief and how that sort of changed their perspective. Alisa?
So one of the things we wanted you to be able to leave with today were several different assessment tools that you might want to use for intercultural learning in your classrooms. And we've thought particularly, what is assessment as learning, maybe as much of assessment of learning in choosing these tools. These are tools that we've either used or could project using in a language classroom. So the first ones that I want to show you are two different Likert scale surveys that get at the student perception of learning. And I'm literally going to show you these. See here. And oops, thanks for dealing with my screen. Can be a little bit hard when I've got a lot of stuff going on the same screen. There we go. Okay, the first one is the Intercultural Attitudes, Knowledge, and Skills Short Scale Survey. And these are available through Purdue. And I'll tell you later, we've got a collection where you can access these. But this particular survey, as you can see, if you remember the AAC&U Intercultural Knowledge and Competence Value Rubric, is calibrated on that rubric. So there are questions that address the different domains of that rubric. So that's the construct. And it's simply Likert scale, as you can see. Now, there are several ways of using this. If you would give it to students before a learning experience, that could help them think already about what they might be learning, what might be important. So it would be very much assessment as learning. It can be used pre-post, but one of the things we're aware of is that many times students overrate themselves in the pre-experience. And so the post changes may not tell you anything, and there may not even be changes, or they may become more self-aware, and actually you'll see that they have lower scores in the post. So another way of offering it is as retro, pre, and then post experience. So this is set up to be used that way. That is, you could, on the same day at the end, let's say, of a course where you've addressed intercultural learning several times, you first have the students think back to where they were at the beginning of the experience as they answer these questions. And then you ask them to answer the same questions, thinking about where they are now, so that you can get at that question of their perceived learning. I also use this in a different formative way, assessment as learning, where I have students just simply fill out that first sheet and then calculate based on the constructs where they might have greater strengths, greater weaknesses, and then choose one of these areas, do a little research project on it. How is it defined more broadly? You grow in that area. And then they make a plan for growth, and they think about how they would assess themselves, what evidence they would need to know that they've grown. And this is kind of a fun way to use this tool. If you have students over a range of time, you can come back to it potentially, like if you do it at the start of a semester, at the end of the semester, and ask them to revisit what they wrote early on and see where they moved. I'd like to show you one of the other similar tools that is based on the AAC&U rubric. See here, which is the Global Learning Value Rubric. And this just shows you why we didn't show you the rubric, because it's very hard to read here. I pull a couple of the domains from this rubric when I work with students as well, or learners in general. And that is two of those domains. And let's see if I can go back to my other, here you go. Namely cultural diversity and personal and social responsibility. And I really like bringing these in along with the other domains on the intercultural, on the other rubric, because they get at power dynamics, And they also get at that question of agency, so that students are reflecting on their own role in society. And I feel like those are very important add-ons at times to the other rubric. So I'm trying to get back to my slides now. Give me a second here. There we go. Moving on then, I just want to speak briefly about the 1-minute paper. And this may be something you already do in some way, shape, or form, because it's a pretty ubiquitous activity. But if you haven't used this, I often did this with students, giving them 1 to 3 minutes to just jot down answers to 1, 2, at most 3 short questions. You can use this at any time. So at the start of an experience, midway through, at the end. You can use it for yourself to just monitor where students are, what they might be confused about, and then shift the learning experience accordingly. Or you can use it to generate something that you would do that day or in the future with the students. For example, I used to use it in literature courses to generate questions for discussion. I've given some examples here of questions that you might use at different moments, just as examples to get at intercultural learning in a 1-minute paper. Then I also want to point out 2 really useful tools that come from Carla, which, if you're not familiar with it, you probably want to be, because this is a set of resources for language learning from the University of Minnesota. And the 2 that I want to highlight relate to intercultural learning. One of these is an inventory called Culture Learning Strategies. Admittedly, this is designed for an immersion setting, but what I like about it is it has a section on communication strategies. And so students can read about a strategy and sort of determine, again, it's Likert scale, the degree to which they already use this. So it helps them recognize strategies they're already using to communicate, which is a key intercultural skill, of course, and then also recognize new ones or identify ones that they could work on. Additionally, there is the cultural core values and culture mapping inventory. And this helps students identify their own cultural values and name, define, and discuss differences within and across cultural communities. So this gets at cultural self-awareness, but what I really like about it is it reminds students that they may have be both high in one area and another area that may seem like polar opposites. And I'll give an example. For example, monochronic and polychronic time. I can operate in both and do, and I'm pretty high in both in different settings. Or and so it really helps students see complexity. So I strongly recommend those 2 as additional opportunities to not just have students complete an assessment as learning, but discuss with them, help them think through why these things can matter and how they might apply them. And then last but not least, at the beginning, we talked about the fact that assessment can get at the who, the what or content, and then the how learning takes place. And I just want to point out the diversity inclusivity framework, which was published in the Diversity and Democracy publication of the American, or the Association of American Colleges and Universities, several years ago. And this gives a continuum, so something to strive for that gets at all those dimensions. For example, it looks at content in a classroom. It looks at the learners and the instructors. Do instructors themselves understand their own views, biases, and values? What can that bring to the learner when that is foregrounded? It gets at some other things that are super important for equity, right now and inclusion. And so I just want to share that as another resource for thinking about assessment, both of intercultural learning, but also about the fact that it's not just what the content is, but it's about how we work with that content that shapes student experience and learning. And then last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce you to a resource that my particular unit at Purdue, the Center for Intercultural Learning, Mentorship, Assessment, and Research, is working on. And it's in fact a crowdsourced resource, so I invite you to contribute to it. If you are not already a member, right now, I encourage you to grab a phone or get on your computer and type in this address, https://hubicle.org, and go ahead and register to become a member. And I share this with you because this is also where you'll find all the tools that we talked about today. So I'm going to give you just a whirlwind tour. So once you've registered and are in the tool, it may look something like this. And I'll just talk about it a little bit while I'm logging on. This is a place where we collect intercultural learning tools of many kinds. There are sorry about that, experiential learning activities. There are resources, research, and several other things. So let me get in here. First of all, let me show you that I have two collections that might interest you. The easiest way to search for collections is to go over into the search area and type in the name of the collection. So one collection that could interest you is Activities Easy to Adapt for World Languages. The reason I wanted to show you this is because if you are looking for, there it is, if you are looking for activities that have already been used in language classrooms that are easy to adapt, I and some others have gone through quite a few, and there are more than 700 experiential learning tools in this Intercultural Learning Hub. And we have picked out some to adapt or that we know would be relatively easy, especially if you're working in the target language. We have also noted here at times what level this might be appropriate for if you're thinking about proficiency level that you're working with. So novice versus intermediate versus advanced. So I just want to point out that collection. And again, I suggest that you access it by going up to the search button at the top and then searching from there. An additional collection that we have created for you today comes from what we have just shown you, which is the assessment of and as intercultural learning. And all the tools that we've cited today, all the assessments are in here, as well as our slides. So you can see this is one of the tools that Tatiana frequently uses. And each tool has learning objectives on it. But what I'd like to show you is the theoretical frameworks. And there's a search tool that allows you, you can see, if you can see this on your screen, that cultural self-awareness and openness are both, and empathy are ticked here. So this actually is calibrated again on the AAC&U intercultural rubric. And so you can search for tools that might address particular learning outcomes. I'll leave it at that for the Intercultural Learning Hub. We would really like to hear from you next. And so we know that you also are doing work with assessment and experiential learning related to intercultural learning. So we would like to open it up now for you all to share what tools you use, what assessments you use, or to ask us questions. And you're welcome to use the chat, or you're welcome to unmute and just go ahead and speak to the group.
And Alita, maybe you can just show the slide that has your email address and the name of the collections.
I'm going to
right.
One more thing then, Tatiana reminded me, thank you. And that is that you are invited to contribute to the 2 collections that I showed you. We would really love for your contributions to be in there. That makes it richer for all of us. But the easiest way to do that is to simply send your contributions to me. In the one collection, I've also invited you to create your own tools, and then I can link them to the collections. But as the author of the collection, I'm the only one, unfortunately, who is able to add to it. So I just invite you to contact me directly. And I am also more than happy to help talk you through how to enter your own tools into the broader toolbox.
Alita, just Annette said that she is not able to see the collection yet, so maybe it has not switched from private to public yet. The particular collection that we created for this webinar with all the resources, all the examples. I know that there were some questions about, can we have access to this rubric, and can we have, the reflection questions, assignment. So all of that is actually stored in the collection. I don't know exactly what the process is for it to become public, but I think it's pretty fast.
I do, and thanks for that reminder. We'll make it.
Okay, that's Annette called it. Annette is the Hubbicle guardian and wizard.
Thanks, Annette.
Thanks, Annette. Okay. So maybe we can look at some questions if there are any. I wasn't monitoring. I'm sorry. I was listening to you. All right. What parts of the toolkit should a beginning language instructor use? One that teaches beginner level students. So I think that this will depend mostly on what your goals are, first of all, right? What are your intercultural goals? And then, and you can see in our examples what we are in Italian using as at the introductory level, at the beginner level. We decided, since we are implementing intercultural learning at the level of the entire program, so all levels, we looked at the AAC&U rubric, and we also looked at the Darla Deerdorf's pyramid of intercultural learning, and we decided that it would be maybe most beneficial for students to start with attitudes, so with openness and curiosity. Although as we work, we address many other aspects of intercultural learning, right? But we decided to explicitly focus on openness and curiosity. Now, so this is our choice. But then I think in terms of language proficiency, if the question was meant in those terms, I think that any of these intercultural interventions can be embedded successfully in a curriculum, as long as they make sense, right? If they go with the theme of what you're actually doing in class, so that they enhance the language curriculum as well. And we perform especially at the beginning levels, the reflections and the materials are in English. So we have 3 of these intercultural labs in one semester. So if you're worried about the actual, mandate of 90% of target language, we are well within it. So I think that using language at the beginning level to reflect, it's pretty much impossible. So we do it in English. So from that aspect, any of these activities could work also at the beginning level.
I would just add that Tatiana has a great example that she uses, which is a name activity that gets students to think about the origins of their own names. So some cultural self-awareness on their own part, but then also looks at the naming patterns in Italy. And that gives them some specific cultural content that may also lead to some language acquisition. But since of course, learning how to say one's own name and present oneself is such a crucial part of the first semester of language learning that fits perfectly with it and does bring in some specific culture and potential linguistic aspects.
Yeah.
I would say it really does. And many of these intercultural activities do. And we didn't talk about that, but in terms of creating a sense of community among the students, and that gets at that inclusivity, diversity inclusivity framework, that this really can build a sense of connection and valuing of each other that is, I think, crucial for students to feel confident in a first semester language classroom in speaking.
And also, I will add to the sense of community also creates this space, and we talked about it. So not only as a safe space, but also as that brave space where these issues, connected to identity, to diversity, to inclusivity, intercultural competence will and can be discussed. There was a question, what would you suggest for programs in which instructors are strongly discouraged from using English? I would suggest all of this intercultural work can be done online in a virtual environment. So I think if you would rather not have any English in your class during class time, then you can outsource it to the web. And then, but I think there's the instructor then can, of course, be present through feedback. But I strongly also encourage you to do at least one aspect of it in class, some kind of debrief. And another thing which I know that we occasionally do pretty systematically, but I know especially my colleague Annalisa Mosca does in intermediate level. Since we have something, discussion boards, weekly discussion boards posts, she always integrates at least one aspect of this intercultural activity in the discussions. The online discussion. So there are different ways that you can go about that.
I wanted to pick up on another question that was asked here, and that is, this is just really quick. Does the Hub include any examples of syllabi that integrate intercultural competence modules into the language instruction sequence? Tatjana?
Yes, and I think Annette already provided a link to what we're doing in the introductory at the beginning level, novice level. So far, I've posted novice level and 101 and 102, so the first 2 semesters, and then the advanced level. And we have finished now officially the intermediate level, so we'll be posting that, I think, reasonably, I think maybe mid-May, so you can have access to that. So, but the links are already in the chat for that. And they should, I think you linked them also in the collection, Alisa. Yeah, so the collection that you will have access to will have all those links to the materials and activities as well. If you would like to share any of your your examples, your ideas, your concerns, I think maybe when, about assessment of intercultural learning, that would be great. And then hopefully also contribute to Hubble.
Aletha, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I noticed, and I'm really interested in what you've done, combining the intercultural competence rubric with the global learning one. Are you doing that at Sylmar kind of across different languages? The work that you do with different languages, and how long have you, been including these 2 aspects? Because I'm very mindful that, a lot of times we get the criticism that we don't address power and privilege. And so we're not social justice until we address power and privilege. So that's really interesting. How long have y'all been doing that? And what does that idea look like better contextualized?
So And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but my previous title before I came to Purdue was Professor of French and Francophone Studies. So I spent more than 20 years in a language classroom, but that's not my current role. And so I have not applied those to language courses, nor are we working with anybody who is doing that. What we are doing is increasingly, or I bring that into another teaching environment that I have with faculty and staff. And certainly in SILMAR, my unit, we are looking at questions and other models that bring in questions of equity and power in and inclusion, belongingness in new ways. So we are constantly seeking models that we can bring in to a greater degree. But I'm sorry, I don't have a real great example, but one of the things I have done is created, my own, it's not in Qualtrics, it's in our learning management system, but I actually have integrated those questions along with the other questions that I care about most from those two rubrics into one of my teaching. So it's all about the backward design, what am I getting at? Yeah, and then how do I measure it?
Thanks.
If you all would permit me, I'd love to just share my screen. So this may be what you see when you get into the hub, right? And guess what? I am also if I click on tools here, this is what I'm looking for. So this is just a list of all the tools, but what I really wanted to show you is that over here on the left are some search parameters. So for example, the ones that I think might be most useful in many instances would be the duration, the tool type. You could look for experiential tools here, assessments, media, debriefing and reflection tools, or whole courses and training programs. And then here, if you just want to focus on your outcome, so you can put in some of those and run a search. So for example, if I'm looking for an assessment for empathy, and I run this search, I come up with a number of different tools that all address at some place the question of empathy, right? So these are not tools that have all been designed at Purdue or by SILMAR. These are collected, and we really invite you to contribute to them as well.
Just one note, Alita, if you see that little sign, there was a little notebook, it means that there is a lesson plan that goes with it, that sort of walks you through all the steps of an activity or an assessment or whatever it is that you're looking for. And I will also add about the materials for Italian. What is not currently in there are the videos, which I'm attempting to close caption, and then those will be available as well.
And we even have a few videos that either demonstrate tools or simply describe how they're used, why they're used, so that you can, in 5-6 minutes, understand how we use them.
Any other questions, observations? Annette you're great. Thank you so much. She provided a wealth of information and links for everybody to access real time. So thanks so much.
And thank you all for attending and for bearing with what I thought was prepared.
In April, right, of all the months,
right?
Which is really intense, yeah. So,
and don't hesitate to reach out to us. We really do want to connect around building these resources so that they're useful and hearing your experiences about them.
Yeah, you should have our emails available also on the slides. The last slide has our contact information. Thank you all so much. That was great, and it's great to share our time with you, and looking forward maybe to the next year's series. What do you say, April and April and Janice?
Bring it on. Bring it on.
I'm just kidding for now, but we'll see.
Listening for more members, right? More people can join. It doesn't have to just be Purdue and OSU.
Oh, absolutely.
So anyone
absolutely.
else who wants to start, get in touch, and then
absolutely.
Yeah. I think this is a group.
a larger group, but we actually need this, right? This focus of intercultural learning in specifically languages. I think that's a, you know, an important focus to have right now. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.